Seat 12F looked like any other place on the plane, and the man sitting there looked like any other passenger. A quiet single dad, traveling with nothing more than a worn backpack and a half-finished children's drawing tucked between his papers. No one on board could have guessed that the calm man by the window once carried a call sign that could shake the air itself. The flight attendants smiled as they passed him. The other passengers barely noticed him until a coded transmission slipped through the cabin's radio system. That's when everything began to change. What seemed like a normal commercial flight quickly took a turn when two F-22 Raptors intercepted, their sleek shadows stretching across the windows. The pilots were ready for confrontation until they heard his voice. One word, one call sign, and the entire situation shifted. Instead of commands from the tower, the F-22 pilots froze, their training pulling them into silence. Then, almost unbelievably, they snapped to attention midair. The passengers whispered in confusion, unaware of what they had just witnessed. Who was this single dad in 12F? And why did fighter pilots recognize him instantly? Even more shocking, a woman on board the one no one paid much attention to had secrets of her own, because she wasn't just another traveler. She ran the FBI, and she had been watching him all along. The man in 12F kept his gaze steady on the clouds outside, as if the sudden presence of fighter jets was nothing unusual. To the passengers, he was just a father making his way home. But to those who knew, the call sign that echoed through the radio, he was something much more. Years ago, his name had carried weight across classified channels, linked to missions that never made the news. But he had left that world behind, trading combat zones for parent-teacher meetings and bedtime stories. Still, the respect in the pilots' voices made it clear, his past was not forgotten. Across the aisle, the woman who seemed like an ordinary business traveler adjusted her glasses. She hadn't expected to encounter him here, not like this. Her position at the top of the FBI meant she had access to names, files, and sealed records. She knew what he was capable of, and more importantly, why his silence over the years mattered. But seeing him sitting so calmly, as though nothing had happened, only raised more questions. Passengers whispered about the strange turn of events, while the flight attendants struggled to maintain calm. Outside, the F-22s still held their positions, waiting for his next move. And inside, the woman who ran the FBI realized her mission had just become far more complicated. The tension inside the cabin grew heavier with every passing minute. Single Dad's calm demeanor stood in sharp contrast to the unease spreading through the passengers. A mother in the back row whispered that this must be a military drill, while a businessman nervously checked his watch, pretending not to notice. The shadows of the F-22s pacing alongside, but the truth was far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. The man in 12F had once commanded operations that required absolute silence and absolute trust, and the sudden recognition of his call sign suggested someone had forced his past back into play. The woman from the FBI kept her expression neutral, but inside, she was calculating. This wasn't coincidence. For weeks, intelligence reports hinted at a hidden network moving quietly across borders, leaving no trace except whispers. Among agents, she had been following leads, but now, staring at the man she thought had disappeared years ago, she wondered if he was the missing link or the only one who could stop what was coming. Meanwhile, the pilots outside awaited orders they didn't fully understand. Their training told them to follow protocol, but the respect in their voices when they addressed him revealed a history far deeper. Inside the cabin, every subtle glance, every unanswered question added to the mystery. And as turbulence shook the plane, it felt less like weather and more like the storm of secrets finally breaking open. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane cut through a wall of storm clouds, and the atmosphere inside grew even heavier. Passengers tightened their seatbelts, unaware that the real turbulence wasn't from the weather. The man in 12F closed his eyes for a moment, but his stillness only fueled the unease of those who kept glancing his way. The call sign he had spoken earlier still hung in the air like an echo no one could escape. The FBI director finally leaned forward, her voice calm but firm as she addressed him quietly. "You shouldn't even exist on this flight," she said, her words layered with meaning. He opened his eyes, and for the first time, the mask of an ordinary single dad slipped. The weight of secrets pressed against them, secrets tied to missions so classified that even she had only fragments of the truth. Outside, the F-22s shifted position, flying dangerously close. The pilots weren't waiting much longer. Either he gave another command, or they would be forced to act on standing orders they barely understood. Inside, whispers turned into anxious murmurs as the plane jolted again. The father's hand brushed against the folded drawing in his pocket, grounding him. But the look in his eyes told a different story. He knew something the rest of them didn't, and when his gaze locked with the woman who ran the FBI, the unspoken question became clear. Was she there to stop him, or to ask for his help in a mission that could decide everything? Before he could answer, the captain's voice came over the intercom, shaky but controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We've been instructed to alter course." The words sent a ripple of confusion through the cabin. Passengers leaned toward their windows, trying to see past the storm, but all they could make out were the glowing afterburners of the F-22s. The FBI director's eyes narrowed. A diversion mid-flight was no routine order. She tapped her phone against the armrest, but there was no signal. The comms were being jammed. That meant someone else, someone powerful, was controlling the airspace. She glanced at the man in 12F, whose comm was almost unsettling. He knew exactly what was happening. For the first time, he leaned slightly toward her and whispered, "This isn't about me. They're after someone on this plane." The weight of his words landed like a strike. Could it be a passenger, a hidden target, or even the director herself? The plane dipped suddenly, oxygen masks rattling above, and the passengers gasped in fear. But amidst the chaos, the single dad remained steady, his fingers resting lightly on the armrest, his mind racing. He wasn't just a bystander anymore. His call sign had pulled him back into a game he thought he had left forever. And now, with the FBI director staring at him, the question wasn't whether he would act, but how much he was willing to reveal before the next move was made. The cabin was silent except for the low hum of the engines. The F-22s had tightened their formation, boxing the plane in with precision. Passengers clutched their armrests, some praying under their breath, others frozen in disbelief. The FBI director leaned closer to the man in 12F, her voice almost a whisper, but sharp with urgency. "If you know something, now is the time." His jaw tightened. He reached into his pocket and unfolded the drawing his child had given him before. The flight, a simple sketch of a plane with the words, "Come home safe, Dad." He stared at it for a moment before slipping it back and finally speaking. "They're not here for me. They're here because of what's in the cargo hold." The director froze. That explained the jamming, the diversion, the sudden military presence somewhere beneath their feet was something so classified, so dangerous, that even the FBI hadn't been briefed. She reached for her badge, ready to demand answers. But before she could, the cockpit door opened. The captain staggered out, pale and shaken. "They said your call sign was the only clearance they'd accept." He was looking directly at the man in 12F. The father stood slowly, the cabin holding its breath. Passengers watched in stunned silence as the F-22s shifted into escort position. But just as the director prepared to follow him toward the cockpit, her phone buzzed back to life with a single encrypted message. She read it once, and her eyes widened. The twist hit her like a wave. He wasn't the only ghost on this plane. Someone else with a call sign was already on board, and they hadn't revealed themselves yet. The tension finally broke when the second figure revealed themselves, a quiet passenger from the back row, a woman no one had noticed until now. She stood, steady and composed, and spoke a call sign that made even the father in 12F turn sharply in surprise. For a moment, it felt like the entire cabin tilted, as two legacies hidden in plain sight faced one another. The FBI director realized she had been caught between not one, but two operatives whose pasts had been buried deeper than any file she'd ever read. But instead of confrontation, there was recognition. The two exchanged a silent nod, the kind only warriors who had once fought the same battles could share. The F-22 pilots, hearing both call signs, eased formation and opened a safe corridor, signaling trust rather than threat. The captain returned to his seat, reassured, and the passengers slowly began to relax, though none truly understood what had just unfolded above the clouds. As the plane touched down hours later, the single dad returned to his role, holding the drawing close and walking toward the arrival gate where his child would be waiting. The director knew she would file a report, but some details would remain unspoken. In the end, the story was less about secrets and more about choices, walking away from power and choosing family, even when the world tried to pee.